Every family has a golden child and a wallet. Guess which one I was? My sister Bellamy got the looks, the endless praise, and a free pass for every terrible decision she ever made. I got good grades, a stressful career in supply chain management, and the distinct privilege of being the responsible one. Which, in my family, was just a polite way of saying I was the emergency fund. It was a freezing Sunday evening in February. Dinner at Uncle Gideon's sprawling estate. 30 people sitting around a custom mahogany table that cost more than a down payment on a house. The crystal glasses gleamed under the massive chandelier. The catered food smelled rich and heavy. The whole performance was flawless. I was just trying to eat my dinner in peace, counting down the minutes until I could escape back to my quiet apartment. Then, Uncle Gideon tapped his glass with a silver knife. The ringing sound cut through the chatter like a siren. The room went dead silent. Gideon stood up at the head of the table. He looked around, making sure he had everyone's undivided attention. Then he looked right at me. "Bellamy is in a bit of a tight spot," he announced, his voice booming off the vaulted ceilings. "She has a loan that needs to be taken care of. $2,800 a month. Marin, you are doing well for yourself. You will cover your sister's payments until she gets back on her feet." I froze. My fork hovered over my plate. 30 pairs of eyes turned to me. Not to Bellamy, who was staring down at her massive, unpaid diamond ring, refusing to meet my gaze. Not to my parents, who suddenly found their expensive linen napkins fascinating. To me. I asked him what kind of loan it was. My voice barely a whisper in the massive room. Gideon did not blink. "Her wedding debt. $80,000. Family helps family, Marin. That is how we do things." I felt the familiar heat of anger rising in my chest, but this time, it was mixed with a sickening sense of betrayal. My own mother leaned in, her perfume suffocating me, and whispered, "Please, Marin, do not be selfish today." That word. Selfish. After everything I had done. "And if I say no?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Gideon's fake smile vanished. His eyes went cold and hard, like flint. "Refuse to pay your sister's debt, and you are out of this family. Walk out that door, and you do not bother coming back." I looked at the people who were supposed to love me. They were trading my future, my security, my life, for a party that had already happened. I put down my plate. The clatter was loud in the breathless room. "Then I am out." But walking away was only the beginning of the nightmare. How did it escalate to this madness? And what did I do next? You are about to find out. I pushed my chair back. The heavy wood scraped harshly against the imported marble floor, a jarring sound that echoed in the vast, overly decorated dining room. No one moved. No one breathed. Bellamy's jaw actually dropped. Her perfect, expensive makeup could not hide the sheer shock on her face. She looked at me like I had just slapped her across the face in front of the entire congregation. For 25 years, she had never heard me say no. Not when she broke my toys as a kid, not when she stole my clothes in high school, and certainly not when she needed cash as an adult. "Marin, sit down," my father, Thatcher, mumbled, his voice weak and pathetic. He did not look at me. He just stared at his untouched prime rib. He was sweating. "Do not disrespect your uncle in his own home." Disrespect? I laughed. It was a short, bitter sound that held no humor, just pure disbelief. I am being asked to pay $2,800 a month for a wedding I was barely invited to. A wedding in Italy for a 25-year-old part-time receptionist. And you are talking about disrespect. Bellamy finally found her voice. It was shrill and dripping with the kind of entitlement that makes your skin crawl. "I needed a beautiful wedding, Marin. Declan's family expected it. You make so much money playing with spreadsheets all day. Why do you have to be so greedy? It is just money." I turned to my sister. The golden child. The one who had insisted on flying 24 people to Lake Como, renting a historic villa, and hiring a celebrity florist while she barely made minimum wage at a local med spa. She was sitting there in a designer dress, wearing shoes that cost more than my first car, calling me greedy. "What is the interest rate, Bellamy?" I asked. My tone was flat. Professional. The exact same tone I used when negotiating with difficult, cornered suppliers. She blinked, confused by the sudden shift to logic. What? The interest rate on the loan. What is it? She shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms defensively. I do not know. 11%, I think. But the monthly payment is all that matters, and Uncle Gideon said you could afford it. 11%. On $80,000. My blood ran cold, then boiled over. This was not just a bad financial decision. It was financial suicide. It was a trap made of sheer stupidity and arrogance. And they wanted me to jump off the cliff for her, to be her financial parachute while she kept falling. I am not paying a single dime, I said, looking straight at Gideon. She signed the papers. She wanted the fairy tale. She can figure out how to pay for it. Uncle Gideon's face turned an ugly, mottled shade of red. He was a man used to giving orders and having people scramble to fulfill them. He owned a massive chain of used car dealerships and a sprawling real estate portfolio. His entire life was built on people bowing down to him, on people needing his money and his approval. I gave you an order, Marin, he barked, pointing a thick, sausage-like finger at me. You will not embarrass this family. You will pay the debt, or you are dead to us. Do you understand? Dead. I would rather be dead to you than broke for her, I replied. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I did not run. I did not storm out in a fit of tears. I walked with steady, measured steps, my spine straight. The silence behind me was deafening. I reached the grand entryway, grabbed my wool coat from the ridiculous golden coat rack, and walked out into the freezing February air. The cold hit my face, sharp and clean. I unlocked my 6-year-old sedan, a reliable car I had paid off 3 years ago, and got in. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the massive rush of adrenaline pumping through my veins. I started the engine and drove away from the estate. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I drove through the dark, winding roads of the wealthy neighborhood, watching the massive, imposing houses give way to normal streets and, finally, to my modest apartment complex on the other side of town. I felt numb. You would think losing your entire family in the span of 5 minutes would hurt more. You would think there would be tears, or screaming, or a sense of profound loss. But as I parked my car and walked up to my second-floor unit, I just felt a strange, hollow sensation. Like a heavy piece of furniture had been removed from a room, leaving a glaring, dusty, empty space. Would they really cut me off? Over a wedding? Yes, they would. Because I was never a daughter, a sister, or a niece to them. I was a utility. A machine that dispensed cash and solved problems. And when a utility stops working, you throw it out and find a new one. But as I unlocked my door and stepped into the dark, quiet apartment, a new thought crept into my mind. A thought that made my heart race in my chest. What else were they hiding? And how far were they willing to go to force me to pay? I did not turn on the main lights when I got inside. I did not want the harsh overhead glare. I just walked over to my small kitchen island, tossed my keys on the granite counter, and opened my laptop. It was an old habit. When things get chaotic, when emotions run too high, when the world feels like it is spinning out of control, I turn to logic. I turn to data. I opened Excel. I created a new spreadsheet. The blue and white glow of the screen illuminated the dark kitchen, casting long shadows against the walls. I named the file, Family Financial History. I started typing. I needed to see it. I needed to build my own personal museum of pain to remind myself why I could never, ever go back to that house. Every time I had swallowed my pride, every time I had drained my savings to keep the peace, every time I had put my own life on hold to fix their manufactured disasters. I needed to put a concrete number on their version of love. First row, Dad's medical bills. 3 years ago, Thatcher had a health scare. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to require a week in the hospital. His insurance had a massive gap because he had chosen the cheapest plan available to save money for his golf club membership. He cried on my couch, literal tears streaming down his face, telling me he might lose the house if the hospital sent him to collections. I had been sending him $600 a month for 36 months to clear that debt. It was never discussed at dinners. It was just expected. Total, $21,600. Second row, the infamous family vacation fund. Corinne, my mother, had decided 2 years ago that we needed to bond more as a family unit. She set up a joint account for a luxury Caribbean cruise. She guilt-tripped me for weeks, saying I worked too much and was drifting away. I contributed $2,000 a year for 4 years. $8,000. When the trip finally happened, they conveniently scheduled it during my busiest quarter at work, the one time of year they knew I could not take paid time off. I could not go. They went anyway. They drank champagne on a balcony in the Bahamas on my dime, posting photos online while I was doing inventory audits at midnight. I never saw a refund. I never even got a souvenir. Third row, Bellamy's broken lease. When she was 22, she decided she wanted to live in a luxury downtown loft. She claimed she needed it to manifest her rich lifestyle. 6 months in, she stopped paying rent because she wanted to buy a purebred French bulldog instead. To keep her from getting an eviction on her permanent record, Mom showed up at my office, sobbing in the lobby, begging me to step in so Bellamy would not be homeless. I paid the back rent and the exorbitant penalty to break the lease. $5,000, gone in an afternoon, just so Bellamy would not face a single consequence for her actions. Fourth row, miscellaneous emergencies. These were the paper cuts that slowly bled me dry. Bellamy's laptop that got stolen at a party. Mom's emergency dental surgery that she wanted done by a cosmetic specialist rather than our regular dentist. Dad's car repairs because he refused to get regular oil changes. $7,900 over 6 years of constant, low-level financial drain. I highlighted the column. I hit the AutoSum button. The number blinked at the bottom of the screen in bold black font. $42,500. I stared at that number until my vision blurred and the zeros seemed to swim on the screen. $42,500. That was a house down payment. That was a massive retirement investment that could have grown exponentially. That was the freedom to quit a stressful job and travel for a year. And I had thrown it all into a black hole of ungrateful, entitled people who had just thrown me away like garbage because I refused to give them $80,000 more. What had I received in return for $42,500? A few cheap birthday cards bought from a pharmacy. A lot of heavy guilt trips. And a front row seat to watching my sister get treated like royalty while I was treated like a broken ATM. I closed the laptop and pushed it away. The screen went dark, plunging the kitchen back into shadows. The numbness was fading rapidly, replaced by a cold, hard fury. It was not a fiery, explosive anger that makes you want to break plates and scream. It was quiet. It was calculated. It was the terrifying anger of someone who had just woken up from a very long, very expensive nightmare. My phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up in the dark, vibrating aggressively against the granite. 16 missed calls. I picked it up. 8 calls from Mom. 5 from Dad. 3 from Bellamy. A text message popped up on the screen. It was from Mom. Please call. We need to talk about what happened. You misunderstood Uncle Gideon. Please do not ruin the family over this. Misunderstood. Right. Another buzz. From Dad. Marin, you are tearing this family apart. Gideon is furious. Bellamy is crying her eyes out in the guest room. Just apologize and we can work out a payment plan for the loan. We can spread it out over 10 years. Be reasonable. A payment plan. He wanted me to go on a 10-year payment plan for a wedding I did not even want to attend. He wanted me to pledge a decade of my labor to a party. Then, a text from Bellamy. I cannot believe you humiliated me in front of Declan and Uncle Gideon. You are a terrible sister. You have always been jealous of me. Declan is freaking out because of you. Fix this now. I did not respond to any of them. I did not even type a single letter. I put the phone on silent and placed it face down on the counter. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights below. Cars were driving by on the highway. People were living their normal lives, going to night shifts, coming home from dates, completely unaware that a few miles away, a family had just priced a daughter's membership at $2,800 a month. I had been the quiet one for nearly 3 decades. The reliable one. The one who fixed the problems behind the scenes so everyone else could maintain their illusion of perfection. But tonight, the rules had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the wallet. I went to my bedroom, changed into my pajamas, and climbed into bed. I expected to toss and turn all night, plagued by guilt, anxiety, or sadness. I expected the conditioning of 29 years to keep me awake, wondering how I could fix their mess. But surprisingly, I felt lighter. The air in my lungs felt cleaner. For the first time in 6 years, I did not have an impending financial disaster hanging over my head that did not belong to me. Tomorrow, I would have to face the fallout. I knew my family's playbook. They would not let an $80,000 debt go this easily. They would send the flying monkeys. They would try to shame me, guilt me, and force me into submission through sheer emotional exhaustion. They thought I was weak. They thought my silence was compliance. They were wrong. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep. When morning came, the real war began. And the first casualty was standing right outside my front door, armed with a cheap cup of coffee and a lifetime of manipulation. The banging started at exactly 6 in the morning. I jolted awake, my heart hammering fiercely against my ribs. The knocking was loud, persistent, and entirely unwelcome. It echoed through my quiet apartment like a drumbeat. I threw off the covers, grabbed my thick robe, and padded out to the living room, my bare feet quiet on the hardwood floor. I crept toward the front door and peered through the small brass peephole. It was my father, Thatcher. He looked exhausted, like a man who had not slept a wink. His shoulders were slumped under his winter coat, and he was holding a paper cup of coffee from a cheap gas station down the street. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, a tragic figure seeking refuge. But I knew better. I knew the script. He was just carrying the weight of Uncle Gideon's wrath, and he was here to dump it on my doorstep. "Marin, I know you are in there," he called out, his voice muffled through the heavy wood of the door. "Please open up. I brought you coffee. Your mother cried all night long. She is making herself sick." I stood perfectly still, holding my breath, pressing my back against the wall next to the door. If I opened that door, I knew exactly how the next hour would play out. He would start with a soft, guilt-inducing tone. He would talk about family unity, about how we only have each other in this world. Then he would slowly pivot to how stressed Bellamy was, how her new marriage was fragile, how much pressure Gideon was putting on them, and how I was the only one smart enough, strong enough, and wealthy enough to fix it. He would weaponize my competence to mask his cowardice. "Marin, please," Thatcher begged, knocking again, softer this time. A pathetic tapping sound. "We just need to figure this out together. Gideon says if you do not pay, he is cutting me and your mother off from the real estate investments. You know we rely on those quarterly dividends to pay our mortgage. You cannot do this to us. You cannot let us lose our home over a silly argument." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. There it was. The ugly, naked truth. It was never about Bellamy's happiness. It was never about family unity. It was about their own comfort. Gideon was threatening their income stream, and instead of standing up to the tyrant who was holding their livelihood hostage, they had driven across town at dawn to squeeze the money out of me. I did not touch the doorknob. I did not make a single sound. I stood on my side of the door, serving as a physical barrier separating myself from the toxicity that had defined my entire life. "I am leaving the coffee right here by the mat," he finally sighed, his voice heavy with dramatic, calculated disappointment. "Call your mother today. Please, Marin. She is worried sick about you." I watched through the peephole as he turned and shuffled down the hallway, a defeated soldier retreating from a lost battle. I waited until I heard the heavy stairwell door click shut before I finally exhaled. The silence in the apartment rushed back in, thick and comforting. It felt victorious. I had won the first battle of the day. I walked into the kitchen and started my own coffee maker. The rich smell of roasted beans filled the air, washing away the lingering tension. As it brewed, I picked up my phone. The screen was flooded with notifications. The family group chat, A chaotic digital space I usually kept on mute was on fire, boasting over 90 unread messages. I ignored the group chat and opened a private message from my cousin Callahan. Callahan was the only person in the extended family who observed the madness without participating in it. He was a software engineer, deeply cynical, highly observant, and he hated Gideon just as much as I did, though he hid it better. "Morning, Rebel," his text read. "Heard you dropped a nuke at the dinner table last night. Legend. The fallout is spectacular." I typed back, leaning against the counter. Gideon tried to force me to pay Bellamy's $80,000 wedding debt. He gave me an ultimatum. I walked out. Callahan replied almost instantly. "Oh, I know. The group chat is a literal war zone right now. Gideon officially declared you dead to the family." His exact words were excommunicated. He told everyone that anyone who speaks to you, texts you, or even looks at you sideways will be cut off from the family funds too. I took a sip of my fresh coffee. "So why are you texting me from enemy lines?" "Because I use a VPN, I make my own money, and I do not need his dirty used car cash," Callahan joked. "But seriously, Marin, you need to watch your back today. Things are spiraling out of control faster than you think. Bellamy is having a total meltdown at their house." "Let her melt," I replied coldly. "She made her bed." "No, you do not get it." Callahan's next message came with a sense of urgent panic. "Declan is threatening an annulment." I stopped drinking my coffee. "Declan? Bellamy's brand new, picture-perfect, country club husband? What? Why?" I texted back, my fingers flying over the keys. Callahan started typing. The three dots pulsed on the screen for a long time. Finally, a massive block of text appeared. "Declan's family is not as rich as Bellamy thought they were. They refused to pay for the destination wedding. Bellamy told Declan not to worry, that her wealthy, successful sister, that is you, by the way, had agreed to cover the entire Italian wedding as a massive wedding gift. She lied to him, Marin. She told him the whole thing was paid for by you. When the loan bills started arriving in the mail at their apartment this week, Declan lost his mind. He realized she took out a massive high-interest loan in secret and expected you to bail her out after the fact. Now that you publicly said no, he wants out. He says it is financial fraud and he refuses to be tied to her debt." I stared at the glowing screen, my blood turning to ice in my veins. She lied. She had used my name, my professional reputation, and my non-existent promise to secure a marriage built entirely on a mountain of high-interest debt. She had taken me hostage in her own fraudulent fairy tale, without ever giving me the courtesy of a warning. And Gideon and my parents knew. They all knew this before the dinner. That was why Gideon had ambushed me with such aggression. They were trying to force me to pay to save Bellamy's fake marriage before Declan walked out the door. My phone buzzed again. "Callahan. She is desperate, Marin. Like, cornered animal desperate. She is going to try to destroy you to save face with Declan and his family. Be careful." I set the phone down on the granite counter. The anger I felt the night before was nothing compared to the cold, calculated rage washing over me now. Bellamy had weaponized my identity. She had made me collateral damage in her pathetic attempt to play a rich housewife. I needed to protect myself immediately. I needed a professional. And I needed to know exactly how deep this financial rot went into the family tree. Because if Bellamy had taken out an $80,000 loan on a part-time receptionist's salary, someone had to have approved it. And banks do not hand out that kind of money without a solid guarantee. I grabbed my coat and my keys. It was time to make a phone call to someone who did not play by the Chin family rules. Bellamy had taken me hostage, but she forgot one crucial detail about what I do for a living. I was the one who controlled the supply chain. And I was about to cut off the supply permanently. By 10 o'clock that morning, I was sitting in a sleek, glass-walled office in the financial district downtown. Across the massive oak desk from me sat Sloane. She was a powerhouse, a brilliant corporate lawyer and financial advisor who had helped my company navigate a vicious, highly contested merger last year. Sloane did not care about feelings, family drama, or tears. She cared about contracts, leverage, data, and winning. "So," Sloane said, folding her hands on her immaculate desk. She wore a sharp navy suit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, and looked at me with piercing dark eyes. Let me make sure I have this straight. Your 25-year-old sister took out an unsecured $80,000 personal loan for a luxury wedding, lied to her husband about it, and now your uncle is trying to extort you into paying it to save the marriage. Exactly, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched in my lap. They have cut me off, which is fine. I do not want their money, their company, or their presence in my life. But Bellamy used my name as a verbal guarantee to her husband. She told him I was footing the bill. I need to make sure my credit is locked down tightly, and I need to know if they can come after me legally for anything. Can Declan sue me for a promise I never made? Sloane waved a dismissive hand, a sharp bark of a laugh escaping her. Legally? Absolutely not. Unless you signed a legally binding document, they have zero claim to your assets or your income. A verbal promise your sister made to her husband behind your back is hearsay and completely irrelevant to you. I will help you lock your credit right now, just to be safe from any identity theft attempts, but you are legally clear. She turned to her multi-monitor setup and typed rapidly. But Marin, something does not add up here. The math is wrong. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward, the leather chair squeaking slightly. A 25-year-old part-time receptionist at a med spa does not get approved for an unsecured $80,000 loan. Not even at a predatory 11% interest rate. Her debt-to-income ratio would be astronomical. It is an instant computer rejection. No bank on earth would touch that. Unless... Sloane paused, her eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. Unless she had a cosigner with massive, verifiable assets. My breath hitched. A cosigner. My parents do not have that kind of money, I said slowly, piecing the puzzle together. They rely on quarterly dividends from my uncle's company just to pay their mortgage. Then it has to be the uncle, Sloane said decisively. What is his exact legal name? Gideon. Gideon Thorne. He owns Thorne Auto Sales, a chain of used car lots, and a bunch of commercial real estate around the city. Sloane's fingers flew across the keyboard. She had access to premium public financial records, business filings, and credit databases that I could never navigate on my own. The room was silent except for the rapid clicking of the keys. I watched her face. For a moment, she looked puzzled, her brow furrowed. Then her expression shifted to something resembling predatory amusement. "Oh, Marin," Sloane murmured, a sharp, dangerous smile forming on her lips. "This is fascinating. This changes everything. What did you find?" I asked, my pulse quickening. Sloane spun one of her monitors around so I could see it. It was a chaotic mess of business filings, lien notices, and commercial credit ratings. It looked like a foreign language to me. Your Uncle Gideon, Sloane pointed to a specific document with a bright red flag icon next to it with her pen, is bleeding cash. His auto dealerships took a massive hit over the last 2 years due to global inventory shortages. He has overextended himself on 2 large commercial real estate developments that are currently stalled due to permitting issues. His liquidity is dangerously low. He is heavily leveraged. He owes millions. I stared at the screen, trying to process the sheer scale of the information. Gideon is broke? Not broke. Cash poor, Sloane corrected, tapping the screen. He has physical assets, yes, but they're tied up and his business credit is balancing on a razor's edge. Now, look at this. She pulled up another screen showing loan structures. If he co-signed an $80,000 high-interest loan for your sister and she defaults, which she absolutely will, because she cannot afford $2,800 a month, that default hits his personal credit directly. The pieces fell into place with a sickening, yet incredibly satisfying, click in my brain. If his personal credit tanks, I whispered, the massive realization washing over me, his commercial lenders will run a check, see the risk, and call in his construction loans. Bingo, Sloane said, leaning back in her heavy leather chair, looking incredibly pleased. If Bellamy defaults, the bank comes after Gideon. If Gideon's credit takes a hit, his commercial lenders will panic. They can demand immediate repayment. He could lose his dealerships. He could lose his properties. The man is sitting on a fragile house of cards, and Bellamy just set a match to the foundation to pay for some flowers in Italy. I felt a dizzying rush of pure clarity. The dinner. The aggressive ultimatum. The threat to cut off my parents' dividends. It was never about family pride. It was never about saving Bellamy's marriage to Declan. It was panic. Pure, unadulterated, desperate terror. Gideon had co-signed the loan to play the big, wealthy patriarch, assuming Bellamy would figure it out or Declan's wealthy-seeming family would eventually foot the bill. When the bills came due and Declan refused to pay a cent, Gideon realized he was trapped. He could not pay the monthly installments himself without exposing his own cash flow crisis to the rest of the family. So, he cornered me. He tried to bully me into saving his empire, masking it as a moral family duty. He was not a tyrant giving orders from a throne. He was a drowning man trying to use me as a raft, willing to pull me under just to keep his head above water. So, Sloane said, her eyes glittering with anticipation. What do you want to do, Marin? We can send a formal cease and desist letter right now to ensure they stop contacting you and your employer. Or we can sit back, eat some popcorn, and just let them drown in their own mess. I looked at the documents on the screen. $42,500. That is what they had already taken from me over the years. And they wanted to bleed me dry to save a liar and a massive fraud. Draft the cease and desist, I said, my voice cold, hard, and resolute. But hold on to it for a few days. Do not send it yet. I want to see what their next desperate move is. Sloane nodded, clearly impressed by the strategy. Smart play. Let them make a mistake. Give them enough rope, and they will hang themselves. I left Sloane's office feeling like I had just been handed a loaded weapon. The power dynamic had completely, fundamentally shifted. They thought they had expelled the weak link from the family. They thought they had punished me. They did not realize they had just cut ties with the only person who could have saved them from total financial ruin. I was not afraid anymore. I was ready for whatever came next. But as I drove back to my apartment, navigating the midday city traffic, my phone buzzed with an urgent notification. It was another text from Callahan. Check Instagram. Now. Bellamy just went nuclear. I pulled over to the side of the road, threw the car in park, and opened the app. I was prepared for a lot of things, but I was not prepared for the absolute masterpiece of public manipulation my sister had just unleashed on the internet. I tapped on Bellamy's profile. She had just posted a 3-minute video to her feed. The thumbnail showed her sitting on the floor of her expensive apartment, wearing a simple, oversized gray sweater that made her look fragile. Her makeup was perfectly smudged to look like she had been crying for hours, though her eyelashes still looked flawless. The lighting was dramatic, casting soft, tragic shadows across her tear-stained face. She looked small, vulnerable, completely heartbroken. I hit play, the volume filling the quiet cabin of my car. Hi everyone, Bellamy started, her voice trembling perfectly. She wiped a single, carefully orchestrated tear from her cheek. I did not want to bring private family drama to the internet, but I have nowhere else to turn. I am completely broken right now. She took a shaky breath, looking directly into the camera lens with wide, sad eyes. As many of you know, I just got married last month. It was supposed to be the happiest time of my life. A true fairy tale. But my older sister, Marin, she made me a promise. A huge promise to help me with the wedding expenses. She is very successful, and she insisted on giving us the wedding of our dreams. So, based strictly on her word, I signed some contracts to make it happen. My jaw tightened. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. It was terrifying how easily she spun reality into fiction. But yesterday, Bellamy continued, her voice cracking with raw emotion. She completely abandoned me. She backed out of everything. She laughed in my face at a family dinner and told me I was on my own. Because of her broken promises, I am now drowning in debt I never, ever would have taken on myself. My new husband is devastated. Our marriage is falling apart before it even begins. I do not understand how someone sharing my blood could be so cold and cruel. The video ended with her burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed uncontrollably. I looked at the view count. 25,000 views. It had been up for less than an hour. I scrolled down to the comments section. It was an absolute bloodbath. Oh my God, your sister is a monster. I am so sorry. Who does that to their own family? So toxic. Cut her out of your life. Sue her. You deserve better, Bellamy. She needs to pay. Praying for you and Declan. Your sister sounds like a narcissistic sociopath. She had done it. She had painted herself as the ultimate victim and me as the wealthy, greedy, manipulative villain. She was using public sympathy to pressure me, hoping the social shame and the barrage of hatred from strangers would force me to open my wallet and pay the $2,800 a month just to make the backlash stop. She thought I would crack under the pressure of public opinion. I sat in my car, staring at the screen, listening to the traffic rush by outside. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to record my own video, to scream the truth into the camera about the 11% interest rate, about Gideon's crumbling empire, about the $42,500 they had already bled from me over the last 6 years. But I am a supply chain manager. I manage logistics. I do not react to chaos, I organize it. Responding to her video would just give her more engagement. It would turn it into a public screaming match, and she thrived in that kind of drama. It would just be a case of she said. I took a screenshot of the video. I took screenshots of the top comments, the most vicious ones calling for my head. I saved them all to a new folder on my phone. File name, evidence. Just as I was about to put the car in drive and head home, a new notification popped up at the top of my screen. A direct message request on Instagram. The name was Lachlan. I recognized the name immediately. Lachlan was a freelance photographer based in the city. He was the one Bellamy had flown all the way to Italy to shoot the wedding. He was incredibly talented, and from what I understood, incredibly expensive. I opened the message, my heart skipping a beat. Hey Marin. I know we only met briefly at the rehearsal dinner. I just saw Bellamy's video on my feed, and I figured you should know something. I have not been paid a single cent for the wedding photos. When I threatened to take her to small claims court last week, she panicked and accidentally forwarded me an email chain she had with her travel agent and a personal shopper. She was trying to prove she was liquidating assets to pay me. I held my breath and read the next part, my eyes scanning the words twice to make sure I was not hallucinating. She didn't use the loan money to pay the wedding vendors, Marin. She still owes the florist, the caterer, the venue, and me. She used $20,000 of that bank loan to buy 2 vintage Chanel bags and upgrade her honeymoon in Santorini to a private presidential suite with a plunge pool. I have all the receipts. Do you want them? A cold, sharp, terrifying smile spread across my face. Bellamy had not just been stupid. She had been greedy. She took an $80,000 loan, let Gideon co-sign it, lied to her husband about me paying for it, and then blew $20,000 on luxury bags and vacations instead of paying the actual wedding costs. She was not a victim drowning in a misunderstanding. She was a fraudster living a lie, stealing money to fund a lifestyle she could never afford. Send me everything, Lachlan, I typed back, my thumbs flying. Every single receipt, every email, every screenshot you have. Send it right now. 2 minutes later, a large zip file arrived in my inbox. I opened it right there in the driver's seat. There it was, in beautiful black and white. Receipts for Chanel. Invoices for a private yacht tour in Greece. Angry emails from the Italian villa manager demanding final payment under threat of legal action. She had framed me on the internet, hoping to shame me into submission. But she had no idea the kind of high-grade ammunition she had just handed me. I forwarded the entire zip file directly to Sloan. Change of plans, I texted my lawyer. Do not hold the cease and desist. Prepare it immediately. And get ready to attach some exhibits. It is time to blow this whole thing wide open. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the main road. The sun was shining brightly. The radio was playing a soft, upbeat song. I had lost a family, yes. But looking at the evidence on my phone, I realized I hadn't lost anything of value. I had lost a group of parasites. They wanted a war. They wanted to use public humiliation and financial extortion to break me. But they forgot that I am the one who calculates the risks. I am the one who tracks the data. And the data was about to destroy them. Thank you for following Marin's story so far. If you want to see how she uses these explosive receipts to dismantle Bellamy's fake life and bring Uncle Gideon's empire crashing down, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. What would you do if your sister posted a fake video about you? Drop a comment below. The first shot in any war is always the loudest. For my family, that shot did not come from a gun. It came inside a crisp, white, legal-sized envelope delivered by a process server directly to the front desk of the luxury med spa where Bellamy worked. I sat in Sloane's office the following morning, watching her review the final draft of the cease and desist order. She had worked late into the night, compiling every single receipt Lachlan the photographer had sent me. The invoices for the vintage Chanel bags. The booking confirmations for the presidential suite in Santorini. The furious emails from the Italian villa manager threatening international collections. Sloane attached them all as exhibits. The letter itself was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It formally demanded that Bellamy cease all public defamation, remove the fake victim video immediately, and retract her statements, or face a massive civil lawsuit for libel and financial damages. But the real genius was the delivery method. We did not mail it to her house. We had it served to her workplace on a busy Friday afternoon. The server just texted, Sloane said, glancing at her phone with a wicked smirk. Package delivered. Apparently, the receptionist working the desk with Bellamy opened it by mistake thinking it was a vendor contract. The entire front office saw the Chanel receipts before Bellamy could snatch it away. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold rush of satisfaction. Bellamy wanted to play the victim on the internet to thousands of strangers. Now, the people she actually had to face every day, her coworkers, her manager, the people she desperately tried to impress, knew the truth. They knew she was not a tragic bride abandoned by a cruel sister. They knew she was a thief who stole money to buy designer bags while dodging her wedding vendors. But I was not done. The cease and desist was just the public humiliation she deserved. Now it was time to address the actual financial parasites. While Sloane filed the paperwork, I pulled out my laptop and logged into my banking portal. For 4 years, I had been paying the entire family cell phone plan. 5 lines with unlimited data. It started when I got my first promotion and Dad convinced me it was a great way to give back. Right below that recurring charge was the joint emergency credit card. I had set up that card with a $5,000 limit explicitly for medical emergencies or sudden car repairs for my parents. But over the last few months, the charges had morphed into luxury groceries, spa treatments for Mom, and greens fees for Dad's golf weekends. I had been too exhausted to fight them on it. Not anymore. With 3 clicks, I canceled the family phone plan. The screens turned gray. The service was terminated instantly. Then I moved to the credit card portal. I reported the card as permanently closed due to a breach of trust. The account vanished from my dashboard. I closed my laptop. It was so easy. Just a few clicks and the financial umbilical cord was severed forever. It took exactly 45 minutes for the fallout to reach me. My personal phone, which was on a separate, private plan, started ringing. It was a landline number from a high-end department store downtown. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello," I said smoothly. "Marin." It was my mother, Corinne. Her voice was shrill, echoing slightly, surrounded by the ambient noise of a retail store. She sounded frantic. "Marin, thank God. My cell phone just says no service." I had to beg the cashier to use the store phone. "Something is wrong with the emergency credit card. It just declined at the register." The cashier tried it 3 times. It is so embarrassing. People are staring at me. "You need to call the bank and lift the fraud alert right now." I pictured her standing at the marble counter of the department store, a pile of overpriced cosmetics and silk scarves sitting in front of her, holding up a line of wealthy shoppers. A week ago, I would have panicked, apologized, and transferred funds immediately to save her from embarrassment. Today, I just looked out Sloane's office window at the city skyline. "There is no fraud alert, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm. I closed the account. Dead silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head. You what? Marin, what are you talking about? I have a balance of $300 here. How am I supposed to pay for this? I guess you will have to put it back, I replied. Or call Uncle Gideon. Since he is the head of the family now, he can fund your shopping sprees. Marin, please stop this nonsense, Corinne hissed, her tone shifting from frantic to angry. We are your parents. You cannot just cut off our card and our phones without warning. We need those things to survive. You need silk scarves to survive? I asked. You are being incredibly cruel, she snapped, dropping the helpless mother act entirely. First you humiliate Bellamy, and now you are punishing us? Over what? Money? You have plenty of it. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They truly believed my money was their money. You sat at that dinner table and watched Gideon threaten to throw me out of the family if I did not pay $80,000 for Bellamy's vanity project, I said, my voice hardening into steel. You literally told me not to be selfish while a tyrant tried to ruin my financial future. Gideon told me I was dead to this family. He made the rules, Mom. I am just following them. Marin, we had to side with him. You know we need his real estate dividends. And now you can live on them. Because you're getting nothing else from me. Marin, wait, dead people do not pay bills, Mom, I said. I hung up. I blocked the department store number. I blocked her cell phone number. I blocked Dad. I blocked Bellamy. I blocked Gideon. I felt Sloane watching me from across the desk. She was leaning on her elbows, an impressed smile on her face. Clean break, she asked. Clean break, I confirmed, slipping my phone into my pocket. Good, Sloane said, standing up and smoothing her blazer. Because that was just the appetizer. The main course is about to be served, and it is going to burn their entire house down. I walked out of her office feeling 10 pounds lighter. The leeches were officially detached. But the real explosion, the domino effect that would shatter the family illusion once and for all, was already in motion. The cease and desist was the spark. The cancelled cards were the gasoline. But the true bomb was ticking away, and it was scheduled to detonate right in Uncle Gideon's lap. The weekend passed in a state of surreal calm. For the first time in my adult life, my phone was silent. No frantic demands. No guilt trips. No manufactured crises. I cleaned my apartment, went for long runs, and slept for 9 hours straight. It felt like I was detoxing from a poison I had been drinking for decades. But behind the silence of my blocked contacts, a war was raging. And my cousin Callahan was giving me the play-by-play from the front lines. Monday evening, I was sitting on my couch eating takeout when a barrage of texts came through. You actually did it. You broke the simulation, Callahan texted. What happened? I asked, putting down my chopsticks. Declan is gone. He packed 2 suitcases on Saturday morning and walked out. His family lawyer sent over annulment papers this afternoon. The grounds are financial fraud and misrepresentation. Declan's mother apparently found out about the Chanel bags from someone at Bellamy's med spa. Word travels fast when you serve legal papers to a gossipy receptionist. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Bellamy had gambled her entire marriage on a lie, and the house had finally won. How is Bellamy taking it? I asked, feeling a strange mix of pity and vindication. She is hysterical. She had to move back into your parents' basement because she cannot afford the rent on their luxury apartment alone. She deleted all her social media accounts after your lawyer's letter. But Marin, that is not even the best part. The real drama is happening right now at your parents' house. I leaned forward, my thumbs hovering over the screen. Tell me. Bellamy missed her 3rd consecutive loan payment today. The grace period expired. The bank's automated system kicked in and sent a massive default warning. But they didn't just send it to Bellamy. They sent it to the cosigner. Gideon. Callahan, tell me everything, I typed. Gideon showed up at your parents' house an hour ago. I drove by because Mom asked me to drop off some groceries, and I heard the screaming from the driveway. Gideon is losing his mind. The bank notified him that if the arrears are not cleared by Friday, they will report the default to the credit bureaus. His commercial lenders monitor his credit daily because of his construction loans. If that default hits, they will freeze his business accounts. It was happening exactly as Sloane had predicted. The house of cards was collapsing. He was screaming at your dad, demanding that Thatcher empty his retirement account to pay the arrears. Your dad was crying, saying he could not do it because of the penalties. Then Gideon turned on Bellamy, calling her a spoiled thief. Bellamy started screaming back that it was Gideon's fault for making promises he could not keep. The entire neighborhood was listening. The perfect family is eating each other alive. I stared at the screen. The golden child, the enabling parents, and the toxic patriarch. Stripped of my money and my silent compliance, they had nothing left but their own greed. They were turning on each other because there was no one left to absorb the impact of their terrible choices. Where are they now? I asked. Gideon stormed out. He told Thatcher that he is cutting off all their real estate dividends permanently to cover Bellamy's debt. Your parents are officially broke. They sacrificed you to please him, and he destroyed them anyway. Karma is beautiful. Callahan was right. It was a tragic, ironic masterpiece. My parents had stood by while Gideon threw me out, terrified of losing their precious income stream. And in the end, they lost it anyway, sacrificed on the altar of Bellamy's vanity and Gideon's fragile ego. Thanks for the updates, Callahan, I wrote. Stay safe out there. Always. Enjoy the peace, Marin. You earned it. I put the phone down and looked around my quiet, safe apartment. The storm was raging outside, destroying the fake empire my family had built, but I was untouchable. I had drawn my boundary, and it had saved me. I went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of wine to celebrate the silence. But just as I opened the bottle, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the apartment. I froze. It was 9 o'clock at night. Nobody buzzed up from the lobby. My heart rate spiked. Was it Gideon? Had he figured out where I lived? Was he desperate enough to show up at my door and demand the money physically? Or was it my father again, begging for salvation now that his dividends were gone? I grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the kitchen drawer, just in case, and walked silently toward the front door. I pressed my eye against the peephole. It was not Gideon. It was not my parents. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, clutching a worn leather handbag and a massive plastic Tupperware container, was an 83-year-old woman, Grandma Opal. I dropped the flashlight on the entry rug and threw the door open. Grandma? I gasped, staring at her small, frail frame. She was wearing her thick wool coat and a silk scarf tied under her chin. She looked up at me, her sharp, dark eyes piercing right through my confusion. She did not look lost or confused. She looked determined. Are you going to let an old woman stand in a drafty hallway all night, Marin, or are you going to invite me in? She asked, her voice raspy but firm. How did you get here? Did someone drive you? I asked, stepping aside to let her in. I took a ride-sharing vehicle, she said proudly, stepping into the warmth of the apartment. The driver was very polite. We talked about his grandchildren. I locked the door behind her, still reeling. Grandma Opal lived an hour away. She rarely left her house, and the family always treated her like she was fragile, borderline senile, and completely out of touch with reality. They smiled at her, patted her hand, and ignored everything she said. She walked into my kitchen, placed the heavy Tupperware container on the granite counter, and took off her coat. I brought you braised pork and rice, she announced. You always forget to eat when you are stressed. Get some plates. I moved automatically, grabbing plates and silverware. Grandma, you should not be traveling alone at night. Does anyone know you are here? I do not answer to them, she said sharply, sitting down at one of the bar stools. And after tonight, neither do you. I paused, holding a plate in midair. What do you mean? Opal reached into her worn leather handbag. She bypassed the hard candies and the tissues and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila folder. She placed it on the counter next to the braised pork. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. Your Uncle Gideon thinks he is a king, Opal said, her eyes narrowing with a fierce, cold intelligence I had never seen before. He thinks because he yells the loudest and wears expensive suits, he rules the family. He thinks I am just a deaf old woman who knits in the corner. She tapped a crooked finger on the manila folder. He forgot one very important detail, Marin. He forgot who owns the land his castle is built on. I stared at the folder. A chilling electric thrill ran down my spine. The domino effect was not over. The biggest piece was about to fall, and an 83-year-old woman was the one pushing it. The apartment was dead silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the manila folder sitting on my granite counter like it was an unexploded bomb. Grandma Opal watched me, her dark eyes gleaming with a sharpness that completely shattered the illusion of the helpless old woman she played at family gatherings. "Sit down and eat," she commanded, nudging the Tupperware toward me. "You look pale. A general needs a full stomach before a battle." I sat on the stool opposite her, spooning some of the braised pork onto my plate. The familiar, rich smell of soy sauce and star anise filled the air, grounding me. I took a bite. It was perfect. It tasted like childhood, before everything got complicated and tainted by money. "Grandma, what is in the folder?" I asked softly. Opal folded her hands in her lap. "Gideon is a fool. He has always been a fool. Even when he was a boy, he wanted to look rich more than he wanted to be rich. He builds things on sand and hopes the wind never blows." She leaned forward. "When your grandfather passed away, he did not leave the commercial properties to Gideon, even though Gideon strutted around telling everyone he was the heir to the business. Your grandfather knew Gideon was reckless. So, he put the prime commercial land, the massive 5-acre lot right off the highway where Gideon's flagship auto dealership sits, into an irrevocable trust." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "A trust?" "Yes," Opal nodded. "A trust that I control as the sole trustee. For 20 years, I have let Gideon lease that land for pennies on the dollar. $5,000 a month. A fraction of the market value. I did it because your grandfather wanted to give him a chance to build a legacy. I did it because I wanted peace. But peace is not worth the price of my granddaughter's soul." I felt the blood rushing to my ears. I knew Gideon's flagship dealership. It was his crown jewel. It held his largest inventory and housed his corporate offices. It was the physical anchor of his entire crumbling empire. And he did not even own the dirt it sat on. "He came to my house today," Opal continued, her voice hardening. "Screaming. Sweating. He demanded that I drain my personal savings to pay off Bellamy's debt because he co-signed it and the bank is threatening his credit. He said if I did not give him the money, he would lose everything." "What did you tell him?" I whispered. Opal smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. "I told him I could not hear him over the sound of the television and asked him to fix my antenna. He stormed out, cursing my name." I let out a short, shocked laugh. She had played him perfectly. "I watched what they did to you at that dinner, Marin," Opal said, her smile fading into deep sorrow. "I sat there and watched your parents sacrifice you to appease a bully. I watched Bellamy parade around with her blood money diamonds. I watched them issue you an ultimatum, expecting you to fold like you always do." She reached out and placed her small, wrinkled hand over mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You were the only one who stood up," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You walked out into the cold because you finally realized your own worth. You broke the cycle, Marin. You did what I was too cowardly to do for 20 years. You are not a coward, Grandma," I said, squeezing her hand. "I was. I enabled him by giving him cheap rent and pretending not to see his cruelty. But no more." She pulled her hand back and tapped the manila folder again. "I am 83 years old, Marin. I am tired. I do not want to manage the trust anymore. I went to my lawyer this morning. We drafted the transfer documents." "Transfer documents?" I echoed, my brain struggling to keep up with the magnitude of what she was saying. "I am stepping down as the trustee," Opal declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "And I have appointed you as my sole successor. You are the only one in this family with a spine, a brain, and a moral compass. The land is yours to manage now." I stared at her, stunned into silence. I reached out with trembling fingers and opened the folder. Inside were thick stacks of legal documents on heavy bond paper. The trust deed. The land survey. And right on top, the updated trustee designation, signed by Opal and notarized just hours ago. My name was printed boldly on the beneficiary and management line. Grandma, this is millions of dollars in commercial real estate, I stammered. I cannot take this. You are not taking it. You are protecting it, she corrected sharply. If Gideon gets his hands on this land, he will leverage it to pay his debts and lose it to the bank in 6 months. The legacy your grandfather bled for in the factories will be gone. You are the supply chain manager. Manage this. I looked at the documents, the reality settling over me like a heavy, magnificent cloak. I was not just independent anymore. I had the keys to the kingdom. There is one more thing you should know, Opal said, a wicked glint returning to her eye. Gideon's lease on the land. What about it? It was a 20-year term. It expired on the 1st of this month. He has been operating on a month-to-month grace period because he assumed I would just renew it blindly for another 20 years at the same ridiculous $5,000 rate. The pieces clicked together so loudly in my mind it was deafening. Gideon was facing a catastrophic default on Bellamy's loan. His commercial lenders were breathing down his neck. And his most valuable asset, his flagship dealership, was currently sitting on expired land that he did not own. And as of this morning, I was his landlord. I looked at Grandma Opal. She was drinking a glass of water, looking incredibly satisfied. She had weaponized a lifetime of being underestimated and handed the ultimate weapon directly to me. What do you want me to do with him? I asked quietly. Opal set her glass down. Whatever you want, Marin. He issued you an ultimatum. I suggest you return the favor. I spent the next 2 hours reading through every page of the trust documents, ensuring I understood every clause, every right, and every ounce of leverage I now possessed. When Opal finally fell asleep in my guest bedroom, looking more peaceful than she had in years, I took out my phone. I drafted a quick, highly specific email to Sloan. I attached scanned copies of the trust transfer and the expired lease agreement. Sloan, I typed. Forget the cease and desist for Bellamy. We have bigger fish to fry. Review these documents immediately. I want to draft a new commercial lease agreement for Thorn Auto Sales. Market rate. No concessions. And I want to deliver it to Gideon in person. Sloan's reply came back 3 minutes later. I am clearing my schedule for tomorrow. Wear a nice suit. We are going hunting. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the sleeping city. Gideon thought he could banish me from the family. He thought he could strip me of my resources and demand my loyalty through fear. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about power dynamics. Tomorrow, the tyrant was going to find out he was just a squatter. The conference room in Sloan's law firm was designed to intimidate. It featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the financial district, a massive slab of black marble for a table, and heavy leather chairs that made you feel small. It was a room built for predators. And today, I was sitting at the head of the table. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, my hair pulled back, projecting nothing but cold, corporate efficiency. Sloan sat to my right, organizing a stack of freshly printed contracts with surgical precision. At exactly 10 in the morning, the heavy glass door swung open. Uncle Gideon walked in. He did not look like the booming patriarch who had commanded the dining room 2 weeks ago. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. His face was gray, his expensive suit looked wrinkled, and his hands were trembling slightly as he clutched a leather briefcase. He had come to Sloan's office under the impression that he was meeting the mysterious lawyers representing Grandpa's trust to quickly sign his lease renewal. Opal's lawyers had seamlessly transferred the communication to Sloan's firm, citing a change in management. Gideon had no idea what was waiting for him. He walked toward the table, complaining loudly to the receptionist behind him. I do not have time for this runaround. Just give me the standard renewal paperwork so I can get back to my business. I have bankers calling me every hour. He turned his head and finally looked at the people sitting at the table. He stopped dead in his tracks. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he managed to produce a sound. Marin, he choked out. What are you doing here? Hello, Gideon, I said smoothly, not rising from my chair. I did not call him uncle. He had forfeited that title. Please take a seat. We have a lot of paperwork to get through. Gideon looked wildly from me to Sloane. Is this a joke? I am here to meet the trustees' lawyers to renew my commercial lease. If this is some kind of revenge stunt for Bellamy's wedding debt, I will have you both disbarred and arrested. Sloane smiled, a shark smelling blood in the water. She slid the updated trust designation document across the black marble. There is no stunt, Mr. Thorne, Sloane said, her voice crisp and professional. As of yesterday morning, Opal Thorne has officially stepped down as the managing trustee. Marin is now the sole managing trustee and legal controller of the land your flagship dealership currently occupies. Gideon stared at the document. He picked it up with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the signatures, the notary stamps, the undeniable legal proof. He read it twice. 3 times. When he finally looked up, the arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by naked, suffocating panic. My mother, she gave it to you, he whispered, sinking heavily into the chair opposite me. She protected it from you, I corrected flatly. You are broke, Gideon. You co-signed a predatory loan for a spoiled child, your commercial lenders are threatening to call in your construction loans, and you have been operating on an expired lease for 3 weeks. You are one bad day away from total bankruptcy. He swallowed hard, sweat forming on his brow. The tyrant had been stripped bare. Marin, please. I am your uncle. I am blood. Blood? I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Blood is what you use to extort money. Blood is what you use to demand $80,000 to fund a fake fairy tale. You sat at a dinner table, surrounded by 30 people, and told me that if I did not pay your debts, I was dead to the family. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the cold marble. I looked directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. You told me that is how the world works, I said softly, delivering the killing blow. You were right. So, let us talk about how my world works. Sloane slid a new, thick document across the table. This is your new commercial lease agreement, I said. You have been paying $5,000 a month for 20 years. A charity rate. My appraisers ran the numbers. The market rate for 5 acres of prime highway commercial real estate in this district is $20,000 a month. Gideon gasped, clutching his chest as if he had been physically struck. 20,000? Marin, I cannot afford that. The auto market is terrible. The margins are too thin. That kind of rent will bankrupt the dealership in 2 months. That is a supply chain issue, Gideon. Not my problem, I replied, throwing his own callous logic right back in his face. You are trying to destroy me, he shouted, a flash of his old anger returning, though it was weak and desperate. I am adjusting a business asset to its fair market value, I stated calmly. Here are your options. Option 1. You sign this lease today, committing to $20,000 a month, plus a massive security deposit. Option 2. You refuse, and Sloane files an eviction notice at noon. You will have 30 days to remove every single piece of inventory, every desk, and every light bulb from my land. And good luck securing a new commercial lot with a massive loan default hanging on your credit report. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was Gideon's ragged, shallow breathing. He looked at the contract. He looked at Sloane. He looked at me, searching for any trace of the obedient, quiet niece who used to write checks to keep the peace. He found nothing but a stone wall. Marin, I am begging you, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Tears actually welled up in his eyes. The great patriarch, crying in a corporate office. If I lose that lot, the lenders will pull everything. I will lose my house. I will lose the other dealerships. Have mercy. I felt a brief flicker of pity, but I immediately smothered it with the memory of the $42,500 he and the rest of them had drained from my life. I remembered my mother asking me to save them while ignoring my pain. I remembered Bellamy calling me greedy while wearing stolen Chanel. Mercy was a privilege reserved for family. And he had already kicked me out. I am telling you the price of admission, Gideon, I said, repeating the exact phrase I had used at that fateful dinner. Pay, or you're out. He stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. He realized there was no negotiation. There was no guilt trip that would work. The wallet was closed, and the landlord was collecting. With a shaking hand, Gideon reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a gold pen, and signed the lease. He pushed the document back across the table, stood up unsteadily, and walked out of the room without saying another word. He looked 10 years older, his shoulders hunched, carrying the crushing weight of his own hubris. I sat in the quiet conference room, looking at the signature on the paper. The empire had fallen. I stepped out of the high-rise building an hour later, the crisp air hitting my face. I left a broken, fake empire behind me in that office. It was time to use the money I used to throw away to build a kingdom of my own. 1 year later, the smell of fresh paint and polished hardwood filled the air of my new living room. I stood in the center of the space, holding a mug of coffee, watching the morning light pour through the large bay windows. It was a beautiful, 3-bedroom townhouse in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. For $150,000. I put down a massive 20% down payment, secured an excellent interest rate, and had the keys in my hand in less than a month. I did not buy it with an inheritance. I did not buy it with family connections. I bought it with the $70,000 I had aggressively saved by no longer funding the extravagant, chaotic lives of the people who shared my last name. The trust money from the commercial land remained in a separate, secure account, growing quietly, ensuring Grandma Opal would have the best medical care and comfort for the rest of her life. The townhouse was entirely my own victory. I walked into my new kitchen, marveling at the quartz countertops. No roommates, no landlords, no toxic family members waiting to ambush me. Just peace. The year had been transformative, but it had not been without its echoes of the past. Gideon's empire had slowly, agonizingly crumbled. He managed to pay the $20,000 rent for 6 months before the strain broke his cash flow entirely. His commercial lenders caught wind of the defaulted wedding loan, panicked, and froze his credit lines. He had to liquidate his 2 smaller car lots just to keep the flagship store open. He was a shell of his former self, no longer giving orders at grand dinners, but sitting quietly in a shrinking office, trying to survive. My parents had suffered the fallout. With Gideon's dividends permanently gone, Thatcher had been forced to come out of retirement and take a job as a floor manager at a hardware store to pay their mortgage. Corinne had to sell her designer handbags on consignment websites. They learned the hard way that enabling a tyrant does not protect you when the tyrant falls. And then there was Bellamy. I ran into her on a rainy Tuesday evening at a discount grocery store on the edge of town. I was there buying a specific brand of organic coffee. She was there buying bulk pasta and canned goods. I almost did not recognize her. She was wearing faded scrubs and a cheap, oversized rain jacket. Her hair was pulled into a messy, unwashed bun. The diamond ring was gone, replaced by bare, tired hands. She looked exhausted, aged, and entirely stripped of the arrogant glow she used to carry like a weapon. We froze in the aisle, staring at each other over a display of canned tomatoes. Callahan had told me she was working 60 hours a week. She kept her receptionist job at the med spa during the day and worked as a medical billing clerk at night just to make the minimum payments on the $80,000 loan, which had ballooned with penalties. She lived in Thatcher and Corinne's unfinished basement. There were no more vacations. No more Chanel. Just the crushing, relentless weight of the debt she had signed for. Marin, she said, her voice small and brittle. Bellamy, I nodded respectfully, but kept my distance. She looked down at her cheap plastic shopping basket, then back up at me. Her eyes were rimmed with red. I am sorry, she whispered. The words sounded like they physically hurt to push out, but they were genuine. There was no camera, no audience, no manipulation. Just a broken girl in a grocery store. I was horrible to you. I lied, I stole, and I blamed you for my own stupidity. I thought because you always fix things, you would just fix this too. I ruined my own life. I looked at my younger sister. I did not feel the blazing anger anymore. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness for the time we had wasted. She had to hit absolute rock bottom to finally see reality. You made a mistake, Bellamy, I said quietly, my tone even. A very large, very expensive mistake. But you're paying for it now. You're learning. She wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. Do you think Do you think you could ever forgive me? Someday. I looked at her tired eyes and the cheap scrubs. I forgive you, Bellamy, I said honestly. And I meant it. Carrying the anger was exhausting, and I did not want it in my new house. She let out a shaky breath, a hopeful, desperate smile forming on her lips. She took a half step forward. Really? Could we maybe get coffee? I forgive you, I interrupted gently, raising a hand to stop her. But I do not trust you. And I cannot have you in my life. Forgiveness is for my peace of mind. But access to my life is a privilege you lost. The hope drained from her face, replaced by a quiet, devastating acceptance. She nodded slowly, understanding the finality of the boundary. She had burned the bridge to the ground, and a simple apology could not rebuild the ashes. I understand, she whispered. I am glad you are doing well, Marin. You deserve it. She turned and pushed her cart down the aisle, disappearing into the fluorescent lights. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of closure. The wound was finally a scar. Thanksgiving arrived a few months later. It was the first holiday I hosted in my new townhouse. The dining room table was not mahogany, and it did not cost a fortune, but it was sturdy and surrounded by warmth. Grandma Opal sat at the head of the table, sipping hot tea and laughing at a joke. Callahan sat across from her, arguing playfully about a football game. Sloane, who had become a genuine friend over the past year, was pouring wine and debating property laws. A few of my close colleagues filled the remaining seats. There were no massive chandeliers. There were no tense, loaded silences. There were no announcements demanding financial sacrifices. There was just loud laughter, the smell of roasted turkey, and the comforting presence of people who actually wanted to be there. This was my chosen family. As I stood in the kitchen carving the turkey, I looked out at the living room. I thought about the dinner at Gideon's estate. I thought about the ultimatum, the 16 missed calls, and the spreadsheet of $42,500. People ask me sometimes if I regret walking out that door. They ask if I miss my parents, or if I feel guilty about Bellamy working herself to the bone in a basement. I do not. I learned a very hard truth that year. Toxic family members will call their exploitation love when they need your resources. They will call it a betrayal when you finally say no. They will rewrite history to make themselves the victims, and they will demand you apologize for their own terrible choices. But real family does not give you ultimatums. Real family does not put a monthly price tag on your belonging. Real family shows up without expectations, respects your boundaries, and loves you for who you are, not for what your bank account can provide for them. Sometimes, the blood you share is a poison you have to sweat out. And sometimes, losing the people who drain you is the only way to make room for the people who actually value you. I have a question for you all listening. Was I wrong to forgive my sister in the grocery store but permanently deny her access to my life? If someone shatters a plate and apologizes, do you try to glue the sharp pieces back together, or do you just buy a new plate? Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you for listening to my story. If you connected with this, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences with toxic families in the comments. Remember, no is a complete sentence.